Hello guys, welcome back to another video on political philosophy. The philosopher for today is John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill was born in May 20th in London, England. He was what we call a genius. He learned Greek at 3, he read Plato's works when he was 7, and began to learn Latin when he was 8. In 1823, at the age of 17, Mill was employed by the East India Company, where his father was already working at. And from 1836 to 1840, Mill worked as an editor in the London Review. Then he continued to publish his works like the famous On Liberty in 1859. He also served as a member of the Parliament for Westminster from 1865 to 1868. Then he died in 1873 during his trip to France with his stepdaughter Helen Taylor. John Stuart Mill was a philosopher that I've mentioned several times in my videos. In fact, he was one of the 4 philosophers that I introduced in my very first video, which was on the social contract. And for a little recap on Mill's social contract theory, he believed that it was not the social contract that brought society to humanity, but he still agreed on the part that the interaction between the government and the individual must exist, and that the individual must return some kind of a benefit to the society in return to the protection the society offers to the individual. And John Stuart Mill argued that certain kind of law that individuals have to follow exist in the society. And these laws say that an individual should not harm the interest of another one's rights, and that the amount of sharing that is needed to protect oneself from the potential threats should be decided according to what's called an equitable principle. And I also dealt with John Stuart Mill in another video called which I dealt with utilitarianism. Do you remember that video? There I introduced Bentham's quantity utilitarianism and Mill's quality utilitarianism. Mill stated that differences in quality does exist, and that intellectual pleasures were more valuable compared to the pleasures that were only sensual. He explained that while sensual pleasures can be experienced by anyone, intellectual pleasures can only be experienced by the educated few, creating the differences of the pleasures in quality. Mill also claimed that only to those who have experienced both the intellectual and sensual pleasures are capable of comparing these two. And although John Stuart Mill is well known for his quality utilitarianism, his most famous theory is that on freedom and liberalism. In his liberalism, he wants to talk about the government interference and about when the government should interfere. And after all, from the very moment the government interferes, one's freedom and rights will be restricted. And this is where the famous harm principle comes in, that when one's actions are harming another, then the government can punish or interfere. But as said, government intervention is lawful only when someone is harming another individual. If one's action is hurting oneself, the government cannot do anything about it under the law. But here's another point. John Stuart Mill never stated that the government must or should interfere in such situations where one's actions are harming another. What Mill actually does is that he tells us that the government intervention when one is harming another is simply possible and is lawful. And I believe some of you guys will have this question. What exactly does Mill mean by harm? Well, what Mill means by harm, it is a concept that is quite different from the concept of mere offense. For Mill, a harmful action is an action that is injurious or an action that retards another's interest and rights. And another important point that we need to know about Mill's liberalism and the harm principle is that motivation matters. That is, according to the motive of government intervention, it can be either lawful or not. And to help your understanding, I will give you an example. But before I provide you with this, please do note that I am simply analyzing it under Mill's philosophy, not regarding other political or any other aspects that might actually be behind them. So here's the example. Caffeinated drinks have some serious drawbacks. It causes headaches, nervousness, dehydrations, and it can lead to many other illnesses. And due to these reasons, highly caffeinated drinks are not recommended for underage students here in Korea. However, many students do drink highly caffeinated drinks to keep them awake during their midterms, their finals, and more. And the government does not ban the underage students from buying caffeinated drinks. And according to Mill, this would be the appropriate intervention the government can make, because it would be up to one's freedom to drink caffeinated drinks, as drinking caffeine would not necessarily harm another one. Mill also gives exceptions to the harm principle. He states that children and adolescents are the exceptions, as they are not mature enough and because they need care from the others. And there is one more exception that he talks about. The exception is which he calls the backward states of society. And this brings us to the next chapter of Mill's philosophy, Mill and his ideas on empires. Mill, as most people did during the period, divided the existing nations into two, the barbaric nation and the civilized nation. And what's the difference between these two? The difference exists in reciprocity and nationalism. For him, civilized nations had society and cooperation, while the barbarians did not. And Mill even stated that barbarians do not have the rights as a nation. Mill believed that the civilized nations during their ruling over barbarians could be just under certain conditions. That, under the conditions if it could make the barbarians capable of developing into a civilized and advanced nation. And extending to this idea, Mill also agreed on imperialism, that the civilized nation can conquer the barbarian nations if the purpose of it is to develop and civilize the barbarians, and if such a goal cannot be achieved on its own. And many perspectives exist upon Mill's ideas. Some believe that Mill just purely wanted to state this idea and that he just simply wished for the development of the barbaric nations, while some, actually most of us, believe that this was just a tool to justify the actions of England and the East India Company during the imperialism era. And for them, they used the fact that Mill and his father was both an employee of the East India Company as its supporting evidence. Today, we talked about the political philosophy of John Stuart Mill, and about the social contract theory and the quality utilitarianism that I've talked about in previous videos, and about his famous liberalism and harm principle, and we looked at Mill's ideas on empire. I hope that this video was helpful, and see you in another video. Bye!